called a meeting of our committee, and they said this changes the situation totally. We got them, and they then called a meeting in the Shwedagon Pagoda, the holy centre of Rangoon. Many people attended, and they passed a resolution by popular acclaim, A, that civil government should return to Burma immediately, and B, that a civil government should be formed composed of members of the resistance movement.
This was unacceptable to Sir Reginald Dorman-Smith, who now returned from Simla to resume his governorship of Burma. By now, his relations with Mountbatten had greatly deteriorated, principally over the question of Aung San.
Sir Reginald Dorman-Smith, governor of Burma, meets Burmese leaders on board a British warship in Rangoon harbour to discuss Burma's future.
But Dorman-Smith preferred to work with pre-war moderates rather than Aung San, of whom...
He's a queer chap. I don't think he's quite all there. He was always a stormy sort of creature. Led student strikes and that sort of thing. But he's not a big enough man to lead this country, as, say, her First Dominion Prime Minister.
Dorman-Smith, with support from the newly elected Labour government in London, was proposing direct rule for Burma, leading to independence at an unspecified future date.
It was, in effect, putting the government back to pre-war days. So I wasn't in the least surprised when the more extreme people, like Aung San, as he was then regarded, should have rejected it out of hand.
After 3 months of stalemate, Dorman-Smith called for his old friend U Saw, who'd spent the war in Uganda. He'd been interned by the British after he too had tried to contact the Japanese after Pearl Harbor. Eric Battersby brought him back.
And I was dispatched in the forlorn hope that he would be able to influence Aung San away from his extremist notions. This was total madness. It simply couldn't have happened. U Saw had no influence in Burma. He was yesterday's man. Aung San was in control.
On U Saw's return, Dorman-Smith now decided to dig up Aung San's wartime past. During the 1942 invasion, many in the Burma Independence Army had run out of control and killed thousands of ethnic minority Karens in southern Burma. Historically, the Karens had been favoured by the British, and many Burmese nationalists regarded them as collaborators. Aung San did his best to halt the massacres, but he was far from blameless himself. Dorman-Smith now assembled a dossier of evidence that Aung San had murdered a village headman during the 1942 invasion. Aung San, for his part, maintained he was merely carrying out a summary execution of a British collaborator. Dorman-Smith ordered his arrest.
Well, Dorman-Smith simply wanted to get rid of my father. He thought that if he could pin a charge of murder on my father, it would effectively remove him from the political scene. It would make him unpopular with the people, and I think he also expected to be able to take action against him, put him into prison. That was how he saw it, which was an indication of the fact that Dorman-Smith simply didn't know what was going on in Burma.
I think he was possibly motivated most of all by hatred of Aung San, who represented all that he himself objected to and hated.
But before Aung San could be arrested, Prime Minister Clement Attlee consulted the file. He concluded that Dorman-Smith had lost his grip and recalled him at once. Dorman-Smith remained unrepentant and later wrote to a friend,
"We'd already hanged a number of Aung San's lesser colleagues for similar offences, and I failed to see why he shouldn't take his chances before a jury. We might have felt bound to exercise clemency had he been sentenced to death, but we could have dealt with that when the situation arose."
With Dorman-Smith out of the way, Aung San and his renamed anti-fascist People's Freedom League were now firmly in control. They demanded immediate independence and came to London to get it.
My colleagues and I have come to London in response to the invitation of His Majesty's government in order to discuss the constitutional questions of Burma. The demand of our people is complete independence.
Attlee was impressed and gave Aung San what he wanted, a guarantee of independence within 1 year.
I've sometimes wondered what would have happened if the Conservative government had still been in power, because I think Churchill had been reluctant enough over India, but I think with the history of Burma, and this, as Churchill would have regarded him as a dangerous traitor, I doubt if his government would have so readily given in, as some people thought, to the demands of the Burmans.
Aung San was surprised too. Before leaving for London, he had laid plans for an armed rebellion to be activated had the talks not gone well.
A Burmese friend of mine told me that the start of the plans was to be the murder of as many as possible of British officers and their wives. And this friend of mine told me with gusts of laughter, I was to kill you and Nancy. Well, that took me somewhat aback, but he seemed to think it was a joke, so I thought I'd better treat it as a joke too. Still, I never felt quite the same about him.
Aung San returned from London to great acclaim, but by now Burma was set to leave the Commonwealth. While in England, he had told Mountbatten why.
He said, I have very sad news. I have to report to you I can't possibly keep Burma within the Commonwealth. I said, why not? He said, because things changed completely after you left. The governor took a violent, I don't say dislike, but he tried to persecute me. He tried to get evidence that I had committed crimes and atrocities so that he could try me, and I think he wanted to hang me. And it's very difficult, therefore, to work with somebody who you know has been trying to pin a murder rap on you and trying to liquidate you personally and refuse to deal with your party. So how can you stay within an empire whose representative is after you? I said, that's very, very sad.
After his dismissal, Dorman-Smith continued to be involved in Burmese affairs. He took a great interest in the minority Karen's claim for their own separate state. Burma was and still is a country of many distinct ethnic groups, many of whom feel no connection with the majority Burmans. In southern Burma, the Karen, fearful of a repeat of the 1942 massacres, were committed to separation from the end of the war. When Aung San returned from London in 1947, he concluded an agreement with all the country's minorities that they would join the independent state of Burma with a measure of autonomy. There was, however, one group missing, the Karens, the so-called British collaborators of the war. The separatist claims of the Karens now became the main focus of a shadowy new group founded by Sir Reginald Dorman-Smith shortly after the Aung San-Attlee Agreement. Based in London, it was called the Friends of the Burma Hill Peoples. The group was mainly made up of conservative politicians, soldiers and journalists. British intelligence watched this group closely from its inception. Back in Burma on the 24th of June, 200 Bren guns were stolen from the Army Ordnance Depot in Rangoon. This was the theft arranged by Captain Vivian and later traced to U Saw. Around this time, Major Hugh Toy visited U Saw and found him seething at Aung San's power.
He contrasted himself with what he thought of as this rather gauche upstart in Aung San. And I got the impression that he really meant to have power, but only when he could get it in a legitimate way.
On July the 14th, the arms thefts came to light. The following Saturday, Aung San was proposing the cabinet tighten security at the Secretariat when they were rudely interrupted. U Saw and 8 others stood trial for murder. Sir Reginald Dorman-Smith offered to give evidence in his friend's defence, but was discouraged by the British government. U Saw was convicted of conspiracy to murder and sentenced to death. Dorman-Smith intervened once more, this time to plead for clemency for his friend. The plea was rejected.